What's up, everybody? Welcome to a Tuesday edition of The Slate. And this one, it's extra special. Matt LaMarca, Gary and Thorne, I am Adam Kaufman. It's special because, well, it's the last one of the week. We don't have any of these the rest of the week. You know, a little Thanksgiving break stuff going on. Guys, you have big plans? You going to celebrate?
I'll let Matt take this one.
I'm going. Yeah, right. That's true.
Because it's not the Canadian Thanksgiving yet.
I'm sure I'll be filling in for a lot of people who have plans this week. That's probably my future.
Yeah, I've got plenty of work to be done on Thanksgiving. I'll go. You know, it's just me, my mom, my dad, one of my two sisters for dinner, and then usually for the evening time we have some like games and stuff that we play. So it'll be fun. It'll be nice to spend some time with the family, but it's still basically like a double NFL week. So I'm also just incredibly busy with work.
Is it board games at the LaMarca house? What now? Now I'm
mostly like
the family game night.
Borderline gambling. We play dice games mostly.
Everybody get the singles out.
Well, mostly, yeah. Singles or quarters. We do horse racing. You ever do horse racing?
I am.
Yeah. So we do stuff like that.
Well,
normally like everybody brings a couple friends, and
sure.
Although now that I'm in my mid-30s or early to mid-30s, you know, my friends mostly have families and stuff, so they don't come through no more.
Well, there's a lot going on. I want maybe later on in the show we'll explore even deeper into
I'm happy to talk about
it. But I suppose it's not what people are ultimately here for. I'm excited for Thanksgiving, guys. It's all the F words. It's family, it's friends, it's food, and of course it's football. And we got a 3-game slate that is going on. We'll get to some injury and news and notes, replacement changes at quarterback, that type of thing as we go on with the show as well. But let's start with the football, because not only are there all sorts of odds and props and things along those lines available to you on the DraftKings Sportsbook, we also here at DraftKings have the $2.5 million fantasy football millionaire contest. $1 million going to first place, plus of course the Tournament of Champions semifinal entry ticket, and it's all based on 3 games. So you know there's only going to be so much differentiation between these. A couple with larger spreads as well that could very well be blowouts. The Bills at the Lions, that's at 12:30. The Giants at Cowboys, 4:30. And the nightcap, the Patriots at the Vikings. That one is at 8:20. So as always, the best part of Thanksgiving football is that it's all staggered throughout the entire day. What are you looking at here, Gary? And what jumps out at you most?
Yeah, I think that Giants-Cowboys line, I'm not saying I think it's off. I'm not saying I think it's wrong. That's a pretty big number. And I know the Cowboys are a very publicly backed team. I know they're coming off a massive win against the Vikings in every single meaning of that word. It's just kind of interesting. It really does speak to the books and just how ready they were to jump off the Giants. Like the first chance the Giants gave them to prove they weren't legitimate. And the books are just like, yeah, they're bad. We knew they were bad, but people had to catch up.
Say that line last week proved that they were pretty illegitimate. I mean, they were favored by 3 points at home against Detroit and lost. So
that's true. I agree. Like it's kind of like the perfect storm. And I was going into this week, I was probably thinking like 7.5. So to see 9.5, it was a little jarring, but at the same time, when I sit down and I really think about it, it's not like I think I want to bet the Giants this week.
Sure. What's the LaMarca book have on that game, by the way, Maddie?
I'm sorry?
What's the LaMarca book have on that game? Your LaMarca adjusted line.
I think 9.5 is a little high for Dallas, but you're going to have to pay a premium when you beat a previously one-loss team by nearly 40 points the week prior. And for my money, Dallas might be the best team in the NFC.
Yeah.
You know, now that they have Dak Prescott back, they have the passing game to supplement their excellent running back. And I'm not talking about Zeke. Tony Pollard might be the best running back in football, or, you know, he's in the discussion at this point. And that defensive line is just ferocious. You just cannot block them. They have too many guys, too many options coming at you. So I probably have this spread, like Darian said. I think the look ahead line here was 7. You know, maybe I would have it 7.5, something in that vicinity. But also, like Gary said, I am not particularly interested in backing the Giants in this spot.
What about that first game of the day? And we can kind of go game by game a little bit, but is this excuse me, is this Bills Lions game going to be as lopsided as the books would tell you, with Buffalo going into Detroit? Dome game again for the Bills, by the way, with this second straight 10-point favorites, Lamarca.
Yeah, I like the Bills in this one. For starters, Detroit's history on Thanksgiving is pretty dubious. They're 4-11 as underdogs on Thanksgiving in their last 15 occasions. The Bills, they didn't cover last week. They pushed or possibly even lost, depending on what number you got. But their offense still put up 31 points, and they did it by only scoring 2 touchdowns. They had 6 field goals. So
basket like 23 points.
Eventually, or with this Bills offense, you imagine that more drives than not are going to end with them scoring 7 points instead of 3, especially against a team like Detroit, who is not very good defensively. So I think that this is a good, not necessarily a buy low spot, but I think that the Bills are being a little bit undervalued here. I kind of wish they had just stayed in Detroit. I get their logic for going home. They wanted to rest after, all the agita it took them to get there. But if they had stayed in Detroit, I would have been very interested in taking the Bills at minus 9.5, 10.
Is there any advantage, Darian, to being in this same building again when it's not obviously your stadium? Like, it's not like you're playing back-to-back home games. That's a whole other thing. You're playing back-to-back road games in the same place, albeit against obviously different teams. But in terms of, I don't know, familiarity and whatever it may be, it's not, again.
Yeah, Gary,
no
from your extensive playing days.
No, I mean, they're
find an
well,
advantage.
in your opinion, like, elements aren't a factor. It's a dome game, but I don't know. Does it make things simpler, or is it just, hey, different opponent, different situation?
I mean, I'll sort of echo what Matt was saying. Like, I think if they had just stayed in Detroit, you could maybe create a narrative where it's like no travel this week. It's a short week to begin with, so now it's almost like 2 times the travel you would expect during the course of a normal NFL week.
Sure.
I don't know. I guess you could. I mean, I was sort of joking about this earlier in the week. I don't know if there's a lick of truth to this, but if there was a fan base that was capable of doing something like this, it would be Buffalo, where I'm sure there's at least some percentage of the Bills fans who bought tickets to last week's game who sort of had the epiphany, hey, why don't we just get a hotel for the week and we'll go to both games? So I think there is going to be a rather large presence of Buffalo Bills fans at this Lions game. Now, that being said, I would be expecting a much higher percentage of that stadium to be Bills fans and friendly to the away team if the Lions hadn't won 3 straight games, if this wasn't Thanksgiving. Like, I think even the most pessimistic Lions fan would say that this is kind of like the one game you can circle on your calendar every single year as the Lions' like most important home game of the season. So I don't even know if there's going to be like that big a crowd advantage for Buffalo playing here in back-to-back weeks, but they're just the better team. I think the Lions defense has looked slightly better the last couple of weeks, but even in that scenario, they're still a bottom third of the league unit. They've been getting a little bit of pressure with their front four. That's great. But I just, again, think this is a Bills team that, generally speaking, if you want to look at sustainable offense, you do look between the 20s more so than you look in the red zone, because that can kind of be up and down and capricious from week to week. And the Bills could not be stopped moving the football last week against the Browns. Like Matt said, they scored 31 points in a game where realistically they probably could have scored 40 or 45 if a couple of things had broken their way. And that's with them getting off to a slow start in the first quarter and also kind of taking their foot off the gas in the fourth quarter. That's how dominant those middle 2 quarters were. So I do have a little bit of fear that the Lions, much like the Browns, could be just one of those teams that backdoor cover. I think that's why the Lions have a little bit of buzz from a DFS capacity. Like, I think there's some interesting names, particularly at wide receiver, depending how the injuries shake out. We just got their injury report. They have not actually practiced this week. These are just projected injury reports, but they've got both Josh Reynolds and DJ Chark as limited. If Reynolds plays, I think he's obviously a very interesting guy for DFS. But if Reynolds isn't able to play, Chark's only like $3,800. He only played 11 snaps last week, but that's, they're building him back. He hadn't played since week 3. I would expect that number to not get like somewhere crazy this week, but maybe he plays like 40 to 50% of the snaps against Buffalo. And if Detroit's spending the entire second half playing from behind and having to throw the football, I do think Chark is like one of those really interesting guys who, you were alluding to this right off the hop, Koff, where hard to differentiate yourself in a 3-game slate. So Chark could be one of those guys that maybe puts your foot in the right direction if you're looking to change up those lineups.
Well, let's expand upon that here, guys. And LaMarca, we'll start with you. But just obviously, I brought up the contest, people chasing $1 million and that Tournament of Champions entry as well. And we can look at some of the recency bias for some of these players. But in terms of lineups, and much can change, especially with injury concerns, as Garion mentioned, but we're less than 48 hours out from this game. Your top 3 projected performers and pretty heavily owned players, as expected as well. Josh Allen is down for 28-29 points, where I'm looking at the moment. Stephon Diggs right around 24. Amon-Ra St. Brown at about 21 points. And these guys are each anywhere between about a third and almost 50% of lineups. So it's a real, eat the chalk type of thing. Do you feel that way about these 3 guys, LaMarca in particular?
It's hard for me to pass on Josh Allen at quarterback. I think that just compared to the other 5 options on this slate, his ceiling is just so much higher, right? There's not another guy that can match what he does. There's very few of those guys in the NFL in general.
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, maybe Lamar Jackson. None of those guys are on this slate. So I think if Josh Allen goes out and he puts up, 30 plus, which he's done a whole handful of times already this season, he's going to be the highest scoring player on the slate, or at least at the quarterback position. And that's hard to overcome when you're talking just a 3-game slate. So the challenge for me is, how can I attack Buffalo and how can I attack this game in a somewhat creative way? Right. I think that, loading up on it is completely fine. Right. The total sits at 54.5 points. The other games are in the mid 40s. So like loading up on 4 Bills pass catchers, I think is completely fine. If you wanted to play Diggs and Gabe Davis, maybe you throw in Isaiah McKenzie, or you bring it back with Dawson Knox. Throw in a running back, or like there's plenty of different ways that you can attack Buffalo that I think will be a little bit less popular. So that's kind of where I'm focusing my attention.
Garen?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think, Buffalo's probably that roster in general. And you mentioned they're the 2 highest projected players right away, are Diggs and Allen, justifiably so. They're going to be really, really popular. And if you are someone who wants to attack this game, I think the 2 possible ways to differentiate yourself would be A, loading up on Lions and just hoping we kind of get into a shootout scenario. And again, you could, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the easiest and safest way to do that. But I think you could take a chance and take a look at, again, Chark, Brock Wright could be an option. Just, a tight end that is getting more work and getting more targets left in the void of TJ Hawkinson now in Minnesota. And then the other way would be to get creative with your Josh Allen stack. Maybe you have Josh Allen and you don't have Stephon Diggs. Maybe you have Josh Allen and you pair him with Gabe Davis and Devin Singletary, who's been known to have 6-7 targets and receptions in a game at any given time. I think you're just going to have to get a little creative, because as Matt laid out, the other quarterbacks on this slate, the other games on this slate really do have the potential to be sort of underwhelming from an offensive and fantasy perspective.
So
one quick thing just to expand upon Garion's point, like individual ownership matters, of course, that's why we talk about it so much, but collective ownership matters more. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, let's say Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs are both 50% owned, but Isaiah McKenzie is 15% owned.
Mhm.
You know, now you're talking about the collective ownership for those three players. Like maybe that's only 5% of lineups that you're duplicating, right? And you still have obviously the other bunch of positions that you can expand upon to bring things down even further. So if you think that Allen and Diggs are the two best plays, and I don't think it's that big of an exaggeration to say that they are, you can play them for sure. Just focus on bringing down the collective ownership of your Bills and Lions players.
The top running backs to consider, because I agree with you. Obviously, there will be guys, that people go with for differentiation's sake that are not Josh Allen, but I don't think there's a better play than Josh Allen. So if you start to look at the running backs, there's certainly Tony Pollard. You mentioned there's Devin Singletary, there's Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, those are probably going to be your top options, depending on what you think of Dalvin Cook on this slate at that salary and all of that. But
I would say pretty safely that Pollard is going to be the most popular running back play on this slate. Just the juice he's coming off of, the fact he's only the third most expensive running back. I would just put that out there that would be my assumption, is he's the most popular by and far. And again, that doesn't mean you can't use him.
Sure.
I just think if we're kind of taking stake of the lay of the land here, Pollard's going to be very popular on this slate.
So I'll tell you at the moment, and again, like projections come from different places, so maybe other sites would have something different than what I'm looking at right now, but Pollard is sitting at around 17-18%. Singletary's at 26%. Stevenson is at about 34%. So
I could see Ramondre being higher owned than Tony Pollard, but I'm smashing the over on 18% ownership.
Yeah. Sure. And yeah,
now look,
like
the Singletary thing is like, it's the game total.
Couple days too.
It's price point. Like, yeah, if you've started your build with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, maybe you just can't afford Tony Pollard. And running back is a place where people more often than not, that and tight end, will try to make their savings back. But yeah, I just think the juice that is coming off of Tony Pollard right now, the fact that Zeke is still limited in practice, and that's probably just a veteran thing, whatever. But the Cowboys finally, with these two guys active last week, realized Pollard's the better running back, and they treated him as such, which was a massive turning point for this team.
Both had really good games though, too, which is just
well, Zeke got to dive in a pair of touchdowns after Tony Pollard did all the work and got them to the 1 yard line.
But, just at the end of the day, like the fantasy numbers are the fantasy numbers. Doesn't matter, who was.
Well, it like process over results.
Saying, that's not a super sustainable approach. You can't be expected to punch in a pair of touchdowns.
Tony Pollard. Yeah, definitely. But, you also.
Who is that fullback who used to steal all of LaDainian Tomlinson's touchdowns?
Oh, jeez.
Anyway, yeah, that's Zeke's new role.
I was thinking more Matt Asiata. That guy was the.
Oh yeah, Matt Asiata was real annoying.
Lorenzo Neal says amen.
There you go, Lorenzo Neal.
But the thing is, you can't depend on Tony Pollard to go for 100 receiving yards and a couple touchdowns either. So it's, we're not sitting here saying like, of course he's going to put up another 30 just because, he's basically averaging that, even better than that over the last 3 games that he's played. But, I don't know where does it, if you're banking on a result from Tony Pollard and you're just assuming another 20 plus fantasy point performance out of him, which I wouldn't even tell you was foolhardy. Clearly the proof's in the pudding. Are you assuming he's rushing for 100? Or are you assuming that he's, going to catch another 5-6 balls and come up with 50-60 yards in the air, a couple of touchdowns? Like how do you see this going from a game script perspective for him?
I just think 20 touches. Like look, there are some pretty insane statistics out there that, what Tony Pollard's fantasy output have been in the games he's started. Did he actually technically start last week? I don't really remember. Zeke might have gotten the first snap. Who cares? Like,
right.
Really, this just comes down to, does he have a starter's quote unquote workload? And if he's going to get 20 touches in the game, considering how explosive he is right now, and just how much of an element he's proven to be in that passing attack in a full point PPR, yeah, he's just dynamite. Like you can't go into a week being like, this guy's guaranteed to score 25 DraftKings points. But if I can go into the week and say, I'm guaranteeing he touches the ball 20 times, we're kind of saying a similar thing.
So I will say, that the game script last week was extremely favorable for Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott, right? They each had 15 carries. So if they can't run the ball as much this week, I don't think it's a lock that Tony Pollard gets back to 20 touches, but he has proven time and time again that even if he gets 15 touches, he's a threat to have a big day. And, you know, we're lowering the bar. You're saying 20 fantasy points. The guy had 40 last week. Right. So we're bringing the bar way down compared to what he's shown us.
Yeah, and he's projected for right around 18 or so at the moment. I'm not talking ownership, I'm talking points. The interesting thing is when I look at optimal builds, which obviously will continue to evolve over the next couple of days, but Justin Jefferson, you can't fit everybody, right? Like that's the whole point, especially when you do have a fair number of elite talents like Saquon Barkley or Dalvin Cook. These guys aren't in the projected top lineup. Neither is Justin Jefferson. So if it, you know, is that a guy that, given that Bills game and all the offensive options there that you talked about, LaMarca, is Jefferson a guy that if you're only building one lineup, if you're building multiple, it doesn't matter. But if you're only building out one lineup chasing $1 million, is Jefferson, especially against that Patriots defense that has been very, very good overall, but certainly has some exploitable aspects of the secondary, is that a guy you're comfortable fading?
I wouldn't call the Patriots secondary exploitable. They're first in pass defense DVOA this year, and they just basically made Zach Wilson have a quarterback game so bad that the team is willing to go to Joe Flacco or Mike White or Fireman Ed. Somebody else is going to be under center for the Jets next week. So I would not call that a exploitable Patriots secondary. I think that Justin
Jefferson,
Jefferson,
the Jets have a Justin Jefferson though.
I think if you listened, I mean, and again, I'm in New York, so I probably hear the rosier side of the Jets, but people will tell you that they have good playmakers at this point.
Garrett Wilson's
like
good.
Garrett Wilson. You know, obviously Elijah Moore hasn't been as good as he was as a rookie, but people still like him. So I think Justin Jefferson this week is best used as like a tournament differentiation piece, right? If I was only building one lineup, it would be very tough for me to click his name over a guy like Stephon Diggs, who's $200 cheaper. I would take CeeDee Lamb at $1,100 cheaper than Justin Jefferson. We know Justin Jefferson's an elite talent. He is as good as there is at the wide receiver position, but it's a really tough matchup outdoors. You know, you can take the Kirk Cousin primetime narrative or leave it. I don't care one way or the other. It's a really tough spot.
Well, I can tell you the commentary in New England around this game in general, never mind specific players, is, hey, the Patriots have won 5 out of 6. That's great. They're into 6th in the AFC. They're in a playoff spot. The Vikings had won, 7 in a row before getting just waxed
all by
Dallas
one score.
Week. Yeah, it got fine, but just got, they'd won them all, mostly anyway. They're 8-2 this year and got destroyed by Dallas. And so now everyone around here is a believer in the bounce back. It's like this, this is where the Patriots, just despite being favored, well, at one point in time they were favored, maybe on another book. Obviously, DraftKings Sportsbook has Minnesota favored by 3 at home, but elsewhere opened as a favorite very briefly. New England. There was some confidence in the Pats initially, and then it just switches immediately to Minnesota and watch them destroy New England and all of that. That's why I guess I start to think about individual pieces as it relates to DFS.
Well, I would just say the fear that I have in general with the Vikings this week, and sorry, I'm just trying to pull up their injury report for this particular day. But, when we talk about pass defense, it's not just the secondary, obviously. It's pass rush. And the biggest concern that I think any Vikings fan had coming out of that game was just the complete inability to pass protect in that contest. I mean, they gave up, I believe Cousins was sacked more times in that game than he had been at any point in his career prior. We just saw what New England's front seven can do to an offensive line that's even slightly susceptible. And Christian Darrisaw has not yet practiced this week with his concussion. I don't think he's going to get cleared for this game. And everything just fell apart. And look, Dallas, arguably the best defensive line in football. So maybe it's a little like apples to oranges here, but I think New England is still top 5 in the league in adjusted sack rate. Like, they have the ability to get to the quarterback and cause some serious problems. So I would just say in general, like, even if Jefferson is winning his matchups, we saw last week in what would be, considered the most positive game script a receiver could possibly have. Like, your team's just immediately down 3 scores. They're going to have to pass the ball all the time. They just couldn't do anything because Cousins wasn't allowed to stand in the pocket for more than a second and a half. So I just worry about the Vikings' ability to score points in this game based on their inability to protect Kirk Cousins. And that obviously affects the ceiling of someone like Justin Jefferson. I would just say in general, that 42.5 in this game looks really high because I also don't trust the Patriots' ability to do anything with the football on offense either.
It's hard to, the way things are going right now.
We want Zappy. Bring back the kid.
So who, as we kind of bounce in between DFS and Sportsbook, we'll get back to the Sportsbook here, but LaMarca, obviously you talked about the Bills, but overall, 3-game slate in general, as you're building out a lineup, who are your favorite plays or guys that you feel like are really, for you, must roster this week?
Josh Allen, I think, is where you start your team. We haven't talked about Saquon Barkley yet. I really like this spot for him against Dallas. Garion just talked about how dominant their pass rush is. The way to attack them is with a running back. You have to get your ground game going. And the Giants have had no problem giving the ball to Saquon Barkley 20, 25, even 30 times a game this year. So I think he is very involved. I think if you're looking for some cheaper players, you go I like Adam Thielen a little bit for the Patriots, or for the Vikings, excuse me, right? What's the narrative around a Bill Belichick defense? What does Bill always do, Garion?
Takes away the best player.
He takes away your best player. And for the Vikings, that's clearly Justin Jefferson. I think we'll have more opportunities for Adam Thielen to make some plays in this game, and he's dirt cheap. And if you want to load up on some of these big time studs, I think a way to do it is to play 2 of the tight ends together. And 2 guys that stand out to me are Dalton Schultz at 3,800 and Dawson Knox at 3,500. What
about you, Garion?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've already covered Josh Allen about as much as we can, but I share LaMarca's feeling about that. Just there are certain slates where you have to eat the chalk at a position, particularly quarterback, and no one supplies the upside that Josh Allen supplies in this spot. So I think you do have to start there. And then if it becomes a matter of having to save salary, as I mentioned, I think there are some interesting places you can go with the Lions. I talked about DJ Chark already. Brock Wright at tight end, especially if you do want to go into a 2 tight end look to really sort of differentiate your lineup that way. I mean, look, Wright isn't going to blow you away with the statistics he's put up the last couple of weeks, but since trading Hawkinson, we're talking about someone who's averaged about an 80% snap share on offense. Last week's game had the 2 targets, the 2 receptions. It's whatever. I think the Lions are probably going to be a little bit more apt to be throwing the football in this contest, not allowing, Jamal Williams to simply carry their offense in a very advantageous spot. So I think I like Wright a lot in this spot, and I like Patriots defense. They're one of the more expensive units on the slate. That's understandable, but I have so little faith in that Vikings offensive line and their ability to protect their quarterback. And really, for me, when it comes to choosing a defense, that's the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth thing I'm looking for is what is the potential for pressure to get on this quarterback. And I just think the Patriots are going to be in that backfield all night long. This is also the 10th anniversary of the butt fumble. So a Patriots defensive touchdown kind of written in the stars.
Has that been talked about much around you, LaMarca?
Yeah, maybe. I might have heard it from a few people today.
What about you? Garion weighed in on the defense. Do you have a preference in terms of defense and special teams other than New England?
my general philosophy with defenses is just play the cheapest ones that aren't going to carry a ton of ownership.
Also works.
I don't know if I necessarily want to play Detroit against the Bills, but Giants at 2,400 against Dallas, sure, that works for me.
Three straight.
If you want to differentiate your lineup, you start with Josh Allen at the quarterback spot. And you know what? Josh Allen is actually not the worst quarterback to kind of like try that strategy where it's like, okay, Josh Allen's going to have 6 touchdowns. He also might throw 3 picks because he's Josh Allen, especially with the way he's been playing lately. So yeah, maybe that's your differentiation tactic is Josh Allen in the quarterback spot, Lions defense in the defense spot.
We can go back to this and maybe we will before we get out of here, but since we only have, I don't know, 10 minutes or so before the Sims kick in, you had alluded, Lamarca, to Zach Wilson, and it appears anyway the Jets are going to be moving off of him to try something new. It doesn't mean they're quitting on him obviously altogether, but at least for this week, maybe going in a different direction after the way that he's looked a couple of times this year against the Patriots in the span of a few weeks, and not to mention kind of defiant in the locker room with the media after the fact, and seeming like he didn't take any ownership of that loss despite the team punting more than he had completions. So what's the answer? What's the strategy? Because this is a Jets team. You can debate how good you think they are in terms of like the greater NFL, but this is a team that is still very much in a playoff mix here.
Yeah, I mean, if I was running the team, I would stick with him. There's talk that the players might revolt in that scenario, which I guess is something you have to take into account. But like, and maybe this is why I would not work in the NFL, but for me, like trying to grind in to the number 7 seed in the AFC to get smoked in the first round of the playoffs, like that's not nearly as important as trying to develop Josh Allen, or boy, I wish it was Josh Allen, trying to to develop Zach Wilson and or find out if he's the answer or not. Because yeah, he's not looked good for most of the year, but he still does a few things that make you take notice. And I think that, benching him now essentially means he's done. And that's probably the right decision long term. But I'm watching what Geno Smith is doing up there in Seattle this year. And part of me wonders if we never gave Geno enough of a chance, because he essentially got like a year and a half as the Jets starter before they decided it was time to move on. And now look at him, right? He's a legitimate NFL quarterback. And so I think that, again, for me, it's all about the quarterback position. That's not a hot take. You need a good quarterback to win NFL games. And the Jets have been searching for one for 20 years. Really longer than that, but I'm going to include Vinny Testaverde as a guy who was okay. So find out, answer the question. And if he's not, try again. But trying to put a Band-Aid on the situation, we've seen it in the past with, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh McCown, and maybe it works for a year, but then you're right back in the same place you started, and it's just not good.
Well, it didn't work with Sam Darnold, but that's where the Panthers are turning this weekend, Gary. And what do you think?
I mean, look, the entire Panthers quarterback room at this point, I think they're not auditioning for the opportunity to play for the Panthers or start for the Panthers next season. I think anyone can see the writing on the wall that the Panthers are going to use their very high draft pick in this year's coming draft to select a quarterback. If they don't, that would be absolute insanity. They're going to basically, this is starting a franchise from the ground up at this point. You've got a coaching vacancy, you've got a quarterback vacancy. So you're going to bring in a coach who has, just a really strong vibe or opinion on a particular college quarterback. And you're going to find a coordinator. Well, this is what I would do anyway. Who knows what the Panthers will do? But you have to find a strong-willed offensive head coach, a play caller if you want, who gels with one of these quarterbacks. And then basically, like most coaches in the NFL or most GMs in the NFL, your fate is going to be tied to that quarterback. So hopefully you were right, but you at least get to start from the first step. Because, as Matt was talking about, the Panthers are not in the same situation the Jets are in right now. And I agree with him. Like, I think if you're the Jets, what good really comes from having Mike White start these last couple of games? Like, I think if anything,
Flacco, in my opinion.
Yeah, Flacco would be the best option. And I understand the situation that Robert Saleh is in right now. I think the more damaging part of yesterday from Saleh's perspective wasn't the play of Zach Wilson, it was the post game of Zach Wilson. Because if the reports are to be believed, a locker room is 55 guys who are putting their body on the line. Like they don't want to hear that we're not making the playoffs. We're not trying to make the playoffs this year. They want the best quarterback in there to give them a chance to make the playoffs. And Saleh is someone who is, grinded his teeth as a defensive coordinator. He's got relationships with the defensive players on that team. And I can understand, like, if you think you're going to lose the locker room by sticking with Zach Wilson, who's been terrible, it makes sense. It's an easy call in that perspective to go like, all right, let's put another quarterback in there. But I do think the Jets need to leave this season knowing whether or not Zach Wilson's going to be starting week 1 next season. And if you bench him right now, that's it. It's over. He should never start another game in New York. And look, this is a situation we've seen time and time again. Like, this is the Tua Fitzpatrick situation from a couple years back. Like, it's a tough balance when you're a team with a bad quarterback who actually has a chance to make the playoffs. Like, it's really a situation that's almost unprecedented.
It's really that. I think that's a great point. The Dolphins stuck with Tua. They were in a very similar spot, right? They could have pivoted to Jacoby Brissett last year, and maybe they win a few extra games, but they didn't. And look where they are now. And I'm not trying to say that Zach Wilson is going to be next year's Tua Tagovailoa, but I'm not saying that there's zero chance of that happening.
Yeah, he's very talented.
Before this year from Tua, what had we seen from him? Very little. But they gave him a wide receiver that he, 2 really good receivers, and now the guy is a borderline MVP candidate.
Yeah, I mean the funny thing, just like in a
Hill and Waddle.
Well, yeah, and look, the Jets tried to get Zach Wilson, Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't have to be Tyreek, though.
No,
they
I
have
know,
money. They have draft capital. They can go out and get a big wide receiver.
No, I'm 100% with you. And look, there was a very easy, like, fork in the road moment in this Tua Dolphin situation. 2 years ago, they had an opportunity, a win and get in game against the Buffalo Bills in week 17. Fitzpatrick had just done that. It was that right after that game against the Raiders, where his helmet was being pulled off as he was throwing a bomb. And somehow the Dolphins came back and won that game with a last-second field goal because of the heroics of Fitzmagic. But the organization was like, no, Tua is starting this game against Buffalo, in Buffalo. And they got their asses kicked. But that's what you have to do, because that's the data pulled from that game is far more important than them making the playoffs and then proceeding to get their asses kicked next week. So I don't know. I think you stick with Zach. Do I think it's going to work out? No. Do I think they should probably pull the cord? Yeah. But their schedule's so cupcake soft the rest of the way anyway. Like, Trevor Siemian is probably going to be starting for the Broncos this week, or excuse me, the Bears this week. Like, let Zach start that game. The defense probably wins it anyway. So I still think even if they start Zach, they're going to make the playoffs. That's kind of the crazy part of this scenario.
And the last thing I'll say, thing is, it is amazing how quick you can change the narrative. It was no less than a month ago that I think most people would have said Justin Fields is not the answer for the Bears and it's time for them to move on. And now I think that has changed. It's done a complete 180. People are excited about what Justin Fields is bringing the Bears. So who knows? Maybe Zach Wilson finishes the year really strong and it gives them something to build on going into next year.
All right, we got to go in a minute, but I want to ask you guys this, if you even have any thoughts on it. It's very early, but the Rams waived Darrell Henderson. The Broncos waived Melvin Gordon. I believe they are both officially free agents after clearing waivers at this point. Where do you expect we'll see one or either of these guys sometime before the year is up, Garion?
I mean, depending on how the Joe Mixon injury progresses throughout the week, I would assume you get one of them working out in Cincinnati. I would say I'm far more optimistic about Darrell Henderson than Melvin Gordon at this point. But yeah, I don't think either's going to be like a fantasy impact guy for the rest of the season. Although, again, to that point, I don't think anyone thought Latavius Murray would be a top 20 running back heading into week 12. Yet here we are.
Lamarca?
Guangdong Tigers. That's
So you're saying cut Melvin Gordon from my season-long team is
Yeah.
the odds of Melvin Gordon having an impact down the stretch seem pretty minimal. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Is the NFL Europa League still a thing? Can they sign there? With the Dragons?
Wasn't Cam Akers the one that was supposed to not make it in LA? What's going on there?
Hey, I got a Cam Akers rookie auto number to 25 if anybody wants it.
He's selling. All right, we got to go. There's Sims on the way. Bengals, Panthers. Is Sam Darnold starting for the Panthers in that sim? Daniel?
Yeah.
You can
Oh,
let
no,
us know.
I don't know about that.
That's coming up in just a few minutes. He says probably not. Well, we tried. But we appreciate everyone hopping on with us, and any questions that you may have had, hopefully were answered as well. Again, exciting to have 3 games coming up on a Thursday. That's always fun. We wish everyone, even those in Canada, who just take the day to do whatever it is that they want, a very happy Thanksgiving.
I mean, work. It's not a holiday.
I know, but I want you to, in the same way that we would like to celebrate Canadian Thanksgiving with you, we would like you to celebrate ours with us.
Sure.
You're a very welcoming group, you Canadians. Join in with us. Where's Jeff to tell me something mean and rude? Thanks to Eamon, thanks to Daniel, Lamarca, Gary, and I'm Adam. Enjoy the rest of the week. Hopefully you enjoy a nice holiday break, and we will catch you the Sweat next on Sunday, I believe, maybe tomorrow before the break, and then the Slate returns on Monday. We'll see you then.
Hee-haw!